strong Pokemon, weak Pokemon. That is only the selfish perception of people. Truly skilled trainers should try to win with their favorites. Those were the words said by Karen, a Pokemon mommy that I hope that she tells me that she wants to dominate. Following the words of Karen, everyone has a favorite Pokemon. A Pokemon that it doesn't matter that it's good or bad, you're gonna always try to make a team and win with it. It's not my fault that my favorite Pokemons are Landorus T, Urshifu Rapid Strike, and Fluttermane. But sadly, in the competitive scene, not always the things are gonna be as bright as you want them to be. It doesn't matter how good they look, nor their story with you, sometimes they're just not gonna be great. Whether it is because of their poor typing, their lackluster move pool, or simply because of their mediocre stats, not all Pokemons can be great. However, there have been exceptions over the years, out of Pokemons that it didn't matter that they didn't have a good double typing, it didn't matter that they didn't have a good move pool, or especially, it didn't matter that they had a low base stat total, they were able to succeed. Recently, an image popped up that showed all of the Pokemon that are currently in the overused tier, the highest tier of not banned Pokemon, that have a base stat total below 500. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about them. Shout out to Freeside for putting that in my timeline. Having a high base stat total is not all, and some Pokemons have already proven that across the years. With that, I'm gonna talk about the 8 Pokemons that are still in OU, despite the fact that their base stat total doesn't reach 500. Starting with, how great was the old era of Pokemon? X and Y introduced the Mega Evolutions, and then in Pokemon Ruby Omega and Alpha Sapphire, they extended with that. Everything was looking great, when in early 2016 they announced the new games of Pokemon Sun and Moon. And everything was looking great with that. Until they released and they got with them this abomination. Ever since it was first introduced, Toxapex has been one of the premier Pokemons in the entirety of OU. But how? How is it possible that a Pokemon with lower than 500 base stat total is being so important so many years later? With the overall nerf of healing moves, and the takeaway from most Pokemons of both Knockoff and Scald, both of which were usually abused by Toxapex, how is it possible that it's still here and it has not died? And for that, we have to take a look at what made him special in the first place. And it's pretty self-explanatory. It's one of the greatest dual walls ever created. Having access to both Toxic and Toxic Spikes to spread poison, and Baneful Bunker to lure opponents into poisoning themselves has certainly helped throughout the years. But without a doubt, the most important aspect of this Pokemon ever has been Recover and of course Regenerator. A Pokemon that is so bulky that, depending on the defensive role that you gave to him, is pretty much impossible to kill for any not boosted Pokemon, also has access to recovering constantly. And in a meta where Glimora is capable to effortlessly spread toxic spikes, its ability to absorb said spikes has just bringing to be barely good enough until at least the end of January. Well, we're finally gonna leave Alola. We're going to a new region. This one is called Galar. I hope that there's not another extremely versatile tank going here for second generation in a row. Right. Tied with Toxapex at 495 base stat total, we have Corviknight. Following the trend of the regional birds that are actually worth for something that started with Staraptor and continued with Talonflame, why all of them are from even generations? Do they hate on Pheasant? What did Toucanon did? Huh? Corviknight took a completely different approach in what the regional bird usually is, from being an offensive threat that is really not that good to being a tank. And oh boy, is he good. It feels like Armorga was specifically designed to be a really good Pokemon in competitive singles, despite the fact that its base stat total is pretty unimpressive. With a really good typing, in Flying and Steel, a typing that is only shared with one other Pokemon, that you should not be impressed to see later in the video, a set of decent abilities that each of them could be helpful in more than one situation, and a really decent move pool that has allowed him to have a wide variety of different options, from special tank to physical tank to U-turner to even a kind of offensive threat with body press and iron defense. Game Freak actually hit a home run when they decided to change the offensive nature of all of the regional birds before and since to give it a more defensive nature for the one of Galar. I just hope that they keep doing these good regional birds without having to rely on Gale Wings to make them work. Keeping the English, I mean the Galarian vibes, we go into Slowking. No, no, not that one. No, not you. Nah, nah, nah. Or in this case, is regional variant, which is commonly known in the competitive scene as Glowking. With only 490 base stat total, Glowking was a really pleasant surprise for the competitive scene. This mind consumed by a shelter guy has a lot of unique things that just make him an ideal Pokemon for some teams. But one of the things that make him clearly a good Pokemon for OU is similar to Toxapex, being a poison type, a poison tank at that has Regenerator. But why is he OU if we already have Toxapex and another Pokemon that are gonna see in a while? Both of them being able to also fulfill the role of being tanks that absorb the toxic spikes. Well, that is because Glowking has two extra things that have mattered a lot throughout the last couple of years. The first one being its great future sight, having a really decent special attack with an insane 120 base power move. It allows you to play some really interesting mind games with your opponent. Mind games which grow exponentially when you combine it with Chilly Reception. After Game Freak decided not to renew the contract of their recently buffed Teleport, which was a negative priority, pivotal move, Chilly Reception, even though not ideal, was a serviceable replacement that allowed Glowking to be kept relevant in the entirety of this meta. Having a slow pivot that is capable of surviving most hits allows it to some really nasty setup potential for your sweepers. Even if your team does not have any setup type of Pokemon, it also allows you to put yourself in advantageous spots, which is something always beneficial, especially in competitive. Those are the reasons as to why Glowking has been able to survive the power creep of the Gen 9 OU. Going all the way back to the first generation, we have to start talking about one of the most unintentionally buff Pokemons of all time in Clefable. Clefable follows a different path compared to the Pokemon that we have discussed up until this point. Now don't get me wrong, its stats are still really decent defensively. However, they are not the insanely both-side bulky Toxapex stats, nor the really good for one side defensive stats like Glowking. Its defensive stats are pretty alright, not insane. Not bad, but not great. Certainly, its insanely wide and varied move pool has gave it a role all over the years, but that's not the main reason as to why it's here. There's actually two reasons as to why this Pokemon became a staple ever since Gen 6. The first one was the change of typing. From being a normal type, which is not an absolutely atrocious typing, but is not a good one defensively due to the lack of actual resistances, to change it into the new, really good Fairy type, turn a Clefable from just a good and that's it tank to something that can genuinely tank a lot of hits from some really good staples, and being completely safe out of any dragon type move. But the second one, and I think that the one that is the most important one, is its two insanely great abilities. If you know anything about Clefable in the competitive scene, is that its abilities, Magic Guard and Unaware, are two of the most broken abilities that a defensive Pokemon can have. On one hand, with Magic Guard, you can make things such as Stealth Rock, Spikes, or even the new Salt Cure completely non-factors due to its effect of only allowing damage by direct attacks. Or, if you do not like that, you can go with Unaware, an ability that makes it so any boost that your opponent has is completely useless. while at the same time, Clefable can boost itself with no consequences. A lot of the time could be a real headache only trying to predict which of the two abilities the opponent is using. And alongside another Pokemon that we are gonna see later on, is the showcase as to why having a variety in abilities could be as important, if not more, than actual great stats. Now, coming from the lands, and surprisingly not the oceans, of Hoenn, we have Torkoal. I would like to talk a bit about its utility, being able to have both Stealth Rock and Rapid Spin, while also having some other status conditions like Will-O-Wisp, but in reality, there's only one reason as to why this Pokemon is here. Even though I would love to say that this Pokemon is more than that, in honesty, it is not. And it's that the entirety of the reason to why this Pokemon is OU is because of drought. Being able to put the sun in switching has single-handedly made this Pokemon viable this gen. In other years, the sun things have not been that great of a tool to use. But this time we have differences, and that is with the past Paradox Pokemons. Having the capacity of boosting a wide variety of different Pokemons, on top of having the added bonuses of everything of what a something could give to you, the sun has been massively buffed in this generation, much more than the counterpart of the future Paradox in the electric terrain, having all of the drought advantages, on top of having a really high physical defense, and those utility moves that I just said just barely made the cut above something like Ninetales, and made the difference between a NU Pokemon and a OU Pokemon. Huh, look what we got here. Another Steel Flying Pokemon. Who could it be if it's not Skarmory? It seems that tanks that share those typings are really good. I wonder why. Well, just like Corviknight, Skarmory has a couple of different reasons as to why he's still in OU. For starters, we already talked about how the Steel and Flying types are really good together. But this Pokemon gives us a step forward and being a physical tank, meaning that its only two weaknesses, Electric and Fire, are usually not that big of a deal, because you are usually not gonna be guarding against them, and they're usually special attacking Pokemons. Meaning that most of the times that you're gonna switch into a physical attacker, you are not gonna receive that much damage. Even if that was all, that probably wouldn't be enough, right? It's really unlikely that a Pokemon with those capabilities would maintain its niche. But this guy has also something else. He can also put Stealth Rocks and Spikes by itself, a distinction that not even the all-around tank of Corviknight could say that they have. His perfect combination of being able to throw debris to the field and being able to always guarantee it because of story alongside its high defense has turned it into an all-time great Pokemon. A Pokemon that has been, for the most time of his life, in OU. We already talked about a weather-based Pokemon from the third generation. I'm sure that there's not gonna be another one, right? 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 Out of all of the 4 weathers that exist in Pokemon, if you can count snow as one, the one that historically has had the most amount of presence in the metas has been rain. And, just like Torkoal, a Pokemon that has become a staple in these rain teams despite the fact of its ridiculously low stats has always been Pelipper. Having the second lowest base stat total out of all the Pokemon that are currently in OU, and not even having any stat above 100, Pelipper is just a product of being in the right place at the right time. As I previously mentioned, he is the guy that puts the rain in the rain teams with his ability Drizzle. And it's also true that he's not the only one that has Drizzle. That is an ability that is also shared with Politoed and Kyogre, but we are not talking about that Pokemon right now. So why a Pokemon like Pelipper has become the biggest staple of this weather, when Politoed used to be so much better? Well, there's a couple of reasons. He has an advantage over Politoed, and it's that he has Defog. Also, the addition of an object like heavy duty boots has taken a lot of the risk of putting this Pokemon in your team, due to the fact that now it's completely immune to Stealth Rock. And although it also has 100% accuracy hurricanes, the reason as to why he ended up taking the notch is one move, being U-turn. As we talked previously with Glowking, being able to have a slow pivot is really great in a lot of different circumstances. And even though Pelipper is not the slowest pivot, he is slower than every other offensive Pokemon in the tier. So even with those ridiculously low stats, every single player of Rain is gonna tell you that he's an invaluable and not exchangeable piece for their weather teams. And now, after all of these other sub 500 base total Pokemons, we get to the absolutely lowest base total of this entire generation, at least up until this point, which is Clodsire. What this cute little boy has done, even by Gen 9 standards, is nothing short of spectacular. Being able to be an OU despite the fact that you have stats of what would be a okay-ish, not fully evolved Pokemon at only 430 base total is really nothing short of spectacular and really impressive. But that's not all. If we take into consideration every single OU tier ever since both special attack and special defense were split in Gen 2, he is the 4th lowest base stat total ever to be in OU. Only trailing behind Gen 2 Marowak, Gen 3 Doctria, and Gen 6 Azumarill. But even with those Pokemons existing, we have to put some context into their stats. Gen 2 Marowak has the item Tick Club, and Gen 6 Azumarill has the ability Huge Power, both of which double the Pokemon's attack, meaning that in reality their stats are a little bit better than the ones of Clodsire. Still below the 500 mark, but higher than his. And Ductrio, even if it doesn't have an ability or an item that basically boosts any of its stats, he has Arena Trap, which is one of those abilities that basically prevents your opponent from switching. So its reason to be in Gen 3 OU is not at all because of the Pokemon, but rather because of a broken ability. So if we put all of that into perspective, Clodsire is, to this date, the single lowest base stat total to be in any OU without any gimmicks attached to it. But how a Pokemon with such a low base stat total has managed to be a part of the OU metagame throughout most of the Gen 9's history? Well, it's because it has a combination of everything of what I said about most of the other Pokemons into one. First, despite having a low base stat total, its distribution is borderline perfect, having just stats in exactly what it needs to fulfill its role. Those stats, along some other things, had allowed him to be one of the best special tanks in the entirety of the tier. Like we have said with other Pokemons prior in this video, the Poison type allows him to have two great advantages in both absorbing Toxic Spikes when it enters the field and being immune to Poison and Toxic, with the addition of obviously resisting really important offensive typings like Fairy type and Fighting type. Just like the other tanks that we have talked about in this video, he also has a healing move, which allows him to have a higher survivability over their turns. But what is clearly its selling point is its two absurdly insane abilities. The first one, Water Absorb, basically allows it to be completely immune to one of the types that he is usually weak to in water. It's really good because it allows him to counter some Pokemon that otherwise would be pretty dangerous like Walking Wake or even Ogerpon Wellspring. But what is usually its selling point is that he is the by far greatest unaware special tank in the history of Pokemon. I already talked a bit about how great unaware is in Clefable, so you can imagine how much better it is in an even bulkier special tank like Clodsire. But the fact that you have to predict which of these two abilities is the actual one that is currently running in any given game is the reason as to why this Pokemon is OU. I have seen several games in OU where somebody loses to Clodsire simply because it wasn't able to accurately predict which of the abilities it was running. It is such a valuable asset to have multiple gray abilities, so good that your opponent has to change the way that they play just to try and predict which one are you having. With all of the things that I mentioned, is the reason as to why Clodsire to this day is still know you. At least January 25, which is the moment that I'm recording this. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. And if you want to support the channel, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It's been an honor to be your host, and see you next time. Bye bye!